Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Tougies Take podcast. It is me, the guy, the fella, here for a solo edition of the show that is really, in a lot of ways, pretty much only going to serve as an update as to what is going on with the podcast and the future of the podcast. This video is overdue. I think this is the third or fourth version that I've made at this point. Because we have consistently tried to find our groove in terms of, still doing this show, as the three of us have now for almost 3 years. And the unfortunate reality of the current situation is that things are not lining up for any of us at all. Obviously it's his, kind of business to talk about, right? Although, if you guys follow Endo on Twitter or, Twitch, and whether or not he's hanging out with me on stream or whatever, he is just still trying to figure things out in terms of navigating the hellscape that is living in a major city in North America in 2024, with him living in Toronto and, whether it be work, trying to find, places to live and everything like that. Like he's having a time, and it is affecting the schedule a little bit, which is perfectly okay, obviously. For Sin, if I'm not mistaken, the last time we did have an episode of the podcast out, it was him talking about, hey, going to Finland. He's over there now. So obviously, that creates its own complications on when can he record, when can he not, when are we, the rest of us, available, right? There's, a 6-7 hour time difference this time of the year, so that creates its own issues, but at the same time, it's not an issue because, granted, it's going to be a little bit different because Endo, unfortunately, hasn't been able to go over to Finland at all. But, for Sin and I to have gone there in June of 2022, and then to have gone back twice in 2023 for him to meet someone while he's over there, it's just a really awesome story. And if the worst case scenario out of that is that a podcast is affected, it's really not a big deal. For me, it's been a lot throughout May and June, as my wife, who I've mentioned before, is an elementary school teacher. As she's finishing up the school year, we're busy as hell. I help out as much as I can to make things easier for her because being a teacher is an incredibly difficult job, and oftentimes said teachers aren't appreciated enough. So I do what I can to help her out. And then we got into the last week and a half, 2 weeks or so, which a lot of you will know this. At first, I thought the majority of my problems were going to be that I had a microphone die on me. That wasn't the case. Unfortunately, we suffered a loss in my family. It's difficult to say that it's a surprise when my father, my grandfather, that is, was 87 years old. But he was in a nursing home and doing really, really well. And then, as it can happen at that age, it just turned. And he didn't make it too much longer after that. The good news is, when I originally went to record this, he was still with us. And it was well, I'm going to get to go see him and stuff like that. I don't know how things are going to go. Within a week of me visiting, he ended up passing away. And now, obviously, throughout the next couple of weeks and into the summer, you get certain complications with that. Whether it be, I won't go into the full details of, well, then again, I kind of have shared details in the past. My grandparents on my mom's side had a lot of ties to a coastal island in Maine. My grandmother was buried out there 6 years ago. My grandfather's going to be buried out there now in the next, coming days, weeks, whatever it's going to be. That has its own complications, stuff like that. On top of just wanting to be there for my family, for my mom especially, for my aunt. So it's one of those things where you have everything going on with Endo, everything going on with Sin, and currently being on another continent, and then everything going on with me from a personal perspective. And unfortunately, the first thing that always gets pushed to the side is this show. And it sucks because we do still really enjoy doing this show, even if the topics of hockey, especially over the last couple of years, haven't always been the most fun things to talk about. If that's been the case, then we've had the moments of just the three of us joking around about whatever, having a ton of fun with viewer questions and stuff like that. And this isn't me saying that the podcast is over. I hope it isn't. I'm not even saying that we're on hiatus. I am just saying I do not know when we are going to be able to record. We do not currently have a schedule. You know, in the past, it's been 2 times a week or every Monday or something like that. I cannot promise you guys anything right now, and it is worth putting that out there, straightforward as can be. This podcast has been a thing for over 4 years now, which is insane to think about. We picked the best time possible to start a podcast in 2020 because we all had so much time to just sit around and be at home. But the idea of a podcast is something that I had since like 2018, 2019. Like, people have been asking me for a while, like, hey, you're going to do a podcast, talk about hockey? Because that was just the thing to do. And then I very much took advantage of the time to be able to do that. And, at the time, and some of you will remember this, much like I am great friends with Endo and Sin now, my old co-host Deej and I were incredibly close friends, as much as you can be, at least for people that we did never get the opportunity to meet in person or anything like that. But in terms of people, like a gaming buddy or whatever, where it's like, hey, I'm talking to you on a daily basis. We're playing games on a daily basis, that type of friendship. And it really solidified itself throughout 2019 and into 2020. There was nobody better to work with on starting this show than him, primarily because of our friendship. And yes, it absolutely helped the podcast in the early days that he's an audio engineer, and that helped kind of get us up to industry standard for a lot of things very, very early on. And I look back on that time at the podcast very fondly. And I don't want to sit here and eulogize a show that I'm not saying is even over, but I don't know. Hey, let's talk about it. We had a really damn good thing going. Very much enjoyed doing the show. We picked up that Manscaped sponsorship relatively early on, that we carried all the way up until, the end of last year when they ghosted us, owing us over $400. That was great. Thanks for that, Manscaped. Work with them at your own risk, I do suppose. But what led to Endo becoming a part of the show and then eventually Sin not that long after was the fact that, and as I've alluded towards, this podcast has been something that has almost documented my declining interest in hockey. And the crux of the issue that developed between Deej and I was that he wanted to have a hockey podcast where it was just like, hey, let's only focus on the positives of hockey. I think back to around this time, Evander Kane was in the news a lot in regards to potential gambling addiction. What's the situation with his wife? Has he committed adultery? It was all very TMZ. I never was one to be like, oh, let's absolutely talk about this. But what I would do, and what I still do to this day when we record, is I'm the one to go through Twitter. I'm the one to go through Reddit and see what the biggest stories in hockey are and what they have been between our last show and the most recent one. And, I'd always present a little potential format run sheet. Hey, if you want to veto anything, go ahead. Eventually, he got annoyed with the idea that I was even proposing certain things again, and very much was viewing it as like, I'm not on board with this idea. And unfortunately, that led to, not only, his involvement in the show ending, but our friendship ending, which still sucks. Had I known that was going to happen, I never would have started this show because I did value that friendship a lot. Wasn't my choice to end it. Do we give this detail? It wasn't even so much that it's like, oh, I'm mad about the show. Remember that Manscaped sponsorship? Yeah, there were accusations on his part of me withholding funds, which was not the case. Which is why all the old episodes I immediately privated so that there couldn't be any claims of me making money off of his work. But I didn't want to put that out there at the time. I still kind of don't feel right putting it out there now. But for those of you that are still here and listen or watch this podcast, hey, there you go. That's what happened there. And not long after, Endo, whose friendship, our friendship had really solidified itself in a very similar way throughout 2019 and throughout 2020 and then into 2021 when he ended up taking over. And then Sin and I had been friends for years, and it was just natural to be like, okay, how can we make this podcast different? Let's have 3 voices instead of 2. And, a little bit SDPN, but at the same time, hey, it's a good formula. Do what you got to do, right? And I do feel like we put out some really entertaining podcasts, whether it be, like I said, just the 3 of us kind of shooting the shit or having certain guests on. We've had the likes of Danny Webster on quite a few times, which was just really cool, finding out that Danny, who follows the Vegas Golden Knights for a living as a writer, was watching the YouTube side of things and the Twitch streams and stuff like that. And getting certain members of the NHL community onto the show and getting to talk like with Deke Slayer a lot about the Coyotes saga and stuff like that. I just feel like we were able to do a lot of really cool things. And looking back at the divide for Deej and I think ultimately I was proven correct, but it's not that I wanted to be correct in this way, because my viewpoint was like, well, man, how are we going to do a show if something negative happens and not talk about the negatives? Not long after he left, the Kyle Beach story broke about Chicago. How the hell do you possibly do a podcast on hockey and just brush over what was one of the biggest stories in the history of the sport, which was followed up upon by all the Hockey Canada stuff that is still going on as those legal proceedings continue, and we still have players, attached to NHL teams that are suspended. I don't see how you talk about everything else except for that when that's the biggest story, even if it's not so fun to talk about. I don't know how the hell we would have handled the Adam Johnson passing. Just be like, just not talk about it when that was the biggest story. I have no idea. As I drop my phone, that's great. And to that point, it was stuff like that started to contribute to the idea of like, man, what even is being a hockey fan nowadays, right? When we know this happened about the 2010 Chicago Blackhawks and how disappointing that was for so many goddamn reasons. And then you get the Hockey Canada story and it's like, oh, cool, things haven't changed much. You get all that stuff off the ice on top of the on-ice product in a lot of ways should be the best it's ever been. And in some ways it is, but how long can you go as a hockey fan without seeing or having conversations about officiating, about challenged plays, about what is this rule, what is that rule, about the Department of Player Safety? It's just been exhausting in so many ways. Like, so much at times of the fun of being a hockey fan has just been sucked out of the sport, and it really is unfortunate. Now, throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs, my interest is kind of, it's gone back and forth a little bit. I'm recording this after Game 5, where Edmonton has pushed the Stanley Cup final to a Game 6, and man, Game 5 was awesome. My attention was very much taken up by the NBA Finals. We were going to talk with Danny about that, and then, of course, scheduling issues popped up again, so be that as it may, Boston Celtics beat his Dallas Mavericks, so that was great. But like the NBA final, even though it ended in 5 games, is super entertaining just because the Celtics were such a well-built team. And now you had a very similar story, a 3-0 series lead for the Panthers, and to see what Edmonton's doing, to see that Connor McDavid's putting forth an effort that should get him the Conn Smythe, even if he loses the series. You have moments like that where it's like, okay, the first 2 games of the series, there was a lot of conversations about officiating and suspensions or lack thereof. When the game itself shines through, God, hockey is still just so good. And that's why we want to keep doing the show. But man, that negative stuff that rears its ugly head a bit too often is such a pain in the ass to deal with. And again, that's just what hockey fandom is at this point. I talked about, some of the positives and stuff like that. You have the Jacob Markstrom trade, the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade out of nowhere. Like that's stuff like that is still so much fun to talk about. Which, by the way, great trade for both Calgary and New Jersey. New Jersey desperately needed a goaltender that they can rely upon, and Markstrom should be that. And Calgary, man, you're moving towards rebuilding. Markstrom wasn't going to be around for too much longer anyway. Before you turn the keys over to Dustin Wolf, you get a first-round pick out of it, which means a hell of a lot more to Calgary than it does to New Jersey, and you get an NHL-caliber defenseman in Kevin Ball. I don't think that affects New Jersey's defense too much. You maybe lose some of the physicality, but you still have Jonas Siegenthaler. You still have John Marino. Dougie Hamilton will be back next year. Not that he's a DFD, but you get the point. Ultimately, great deal for both sides. Washington and LA is just such a weird situation. It's that stuff that is so fun to talk about. And then there's all that negative. Like I said, we didn't even get to talk about it on the show. The PWHL, the power trip for control of the freaking Walter Cup champion PWHL Minnesota team, who get rid of their GM a week after winning the damn title in what was a very entertaining final. You get that same team drafting a player who drifts a little bit further away from the line of, okay, where's the line between you disagree with someone's lifestyle or who they are versus you hate them for it? She's closer to the hate them for it side. So there's been a lot of pushback, especially during Pride Month, in regards to their decision to draft a said individual. It just seems like you can't escape the negative with the good. And hey, maybe that's just life, right? And it extends to the hockey world as well. It's just been a really weird 4 years now in terms of what the hell is 4 years now in terms of what the hell is going on with hockey in the first place. And, it gets uncomfortable when you see a lot of those stones overturned to see just what is going on, right? I think we've seen it in the film industry with the Harvey Weinsteins of the world. We've seen it in other sports or even sport adjacent things, like professional wrestling was very much altered by speaking out a couple of years ago. It's interesting. But like I said, it's those positives and those fun to talk about topics that keep us wanting to do the show, which again is why I'm not committing to it being over or to it even being a hiatus. But I just wanted to get this out there to explain to you guys just kind of what is going on with us, where we've been, what's happening with the show moving forward. If we have the opportunity to record, we are going to do so, and there will be episodes out. If we don't, you might not see anything on this feed for a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months. If it's ever, there'll be at least one more to be like, hey, we're officially done. We're not going to leave you guys hanging that badly. But I think with that, I've covered kind of everything that I've really wanted to mention and to talk about this time out. Thinking. I think that's everything. Like I said, I didn't intend for this to be a potential eulogy for this podcast, but who knows? Maybe that's what it'll serve as. But again, the game plan is for us to come back. Just bear with us as all three of us in so many different aspects of life have life-altering things going on. You just never know how things are going to go. But for now, I will leave it at that. Thank you guys so much for watching this podcast, for supporting this podcast, for listening to this podcast. And again, hopefully we will be back much sooner rather than later, because there is so much fun stuff to talk about. We have the draft coming up, and in regards to that, if we're not putting out stuff on this channel, there's still a very good chance you'll see videos from me on the main channel. Of course, Tougie24 talking about the draft and stuff like that. I know Sin FTW Productions, or CYN FTW Productions on YouTube. He's going to be making videos talking about the Sharks while he's over in Finland. Of course, they've done some things. They picked up Ty Dellandrea. They claimed Barclay Goodrow. And they have a number 1 overall pick coming up in a very short amount of time, which, by the way, can we not have the NHL season extend towards the end of June? Good Lord, the NHL scheduling needs to change. I remember the 2004 Stanley Cup final. I had Game 7 recorded on a VHS tape, kids. and they were hyping up like game 1 or game 2 of the Lakers and Pistons. The NHL was ending their season, and the NBA is here, and now all of a sudden the NBA finals finish much sooner. I don't even know. It's just weird. Of course, Endo. You can follow at Endurance M. The links are down below because he knows he's got an interesting name. But of course, he is still out there on the Twitch side of things, still hanging out, playing games almost on a nightly basis with myself. And of course, I will be continuing to stream and all of that, and hopefully putting out videos as much as I possibly can, again, given the current ongoing circumstances. For now, it's not a goodbye. It's a see you later. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.